Welcome to Better Than We Found It, the podcast dedicated to people who have a purpose-driven mission to leave a positive legacy through their leadership. Here, we bring you a diverse range of executive leaders and aspiring future leaders engaging in thoughtful conversation around harnessing sustainability to guide a responsible leadership, creating positive change, and ultimately driving value creation. I'm your host, Josh Huggins, and the founder of GS2 Partnership, a global talent solutions firm focusing on current and future leadership positions within sustainably conscious and positive impact organisations. We are on a critical journey to connect to the people who believe in leaving the world better than we found it.
So hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Better Than We Found It, the podcast dedicated to focus on purpose-driven leadership and value creation. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Darren Anstee. Darren, I'll hand over to you in a second to give an introduction to yourself, but Darren's somebody I've known now for some time, and I think is an exceptional guest to tell his story more from an HSE perspective in today's society, and I'm sure you're going to love the episode. So Darren, welcome. Thank you very much for making the time on your busy travels across the globe. It'll be great if you could do an introduction to yourself, your current role and remit, and the organisation that you work for.
Yeah, great. First of all, thanks for having me, Josh. And yeah, you're right. I'm just back for a month in Asia Pacific, so it's nice to be back in Houston. So look, I'm the global head of OSH for TKE. I've been in the role now for around 5 months, so still very much just starting to settle in and find my feet. For people who aren't aware of who TKE is, they're essentially a global elevator, escalator, airport infrastructure and home solutions company. So it's a mobility company. We keep the world moving essentially. It's a large company, about 50,000 employees, and probably another 10 or 20,000 subcons, operating in about 100 countries around the world. So it's a big business, and it's a really enjoyable business to be in at the moment. It's an exciting time.
Great. Well, I'm very, very excited to get into it and talk in a bit more detail about the role. But I think it would be great to go back and tell a bit about your story and how you've got there. To start with, though, I'm sure the eagle-eyed or eagle listeners will detect an Australian twang in that voice, and certainly Houston perhaps isn't that your birthplace. So tell us Correct. A bit about your background and your story from the start.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I'm born in Melbourne, Australia. Spent my sort of formative years very much in the country. So I grew up a really simple life. Dad was a school teacher. Mum was a homemaker. My first 17 years were fairly low key. I grew up as a normal Aussie kid, kicking around in the a sporting lifestyle. A very light interest in school, probably not as serious as I should have been at the time, but grew up in a really happy, sort of healthy home. Did all my schooling in the state of Victoria in Australia. And then literally on a whim, I think within 2 weeks, I decided to join the military halfway through my year 12, which was not a popular decision in the house because my dad was an educator and he really wanted me to finish my year 12. But as I'm sure you can appreciate, at 17, kids know everything. And I was one of those kids who knew everything at the time. So off I went, and I started my military career as a 17-year-old kid.
So you say on a whim, and one of the great pleasures I have in talking to executive leaders now is hearing about their story, and some that really planned it out, others who made snap decisions. What were the options for you at that time? If you didn't go to the military, what other things could you have considered, and why did it culminate in that decision to jump into the military?
Yeah, look, I'm normally a pretty structured, sort of considered person. I don't tend to make decisions on the fly. But this one, I was literally halfway through finishing my year 12. I probably lost a little attention on my schooling at the time, and I couldn't sort of put my finger on why. I became distracted at school, and I was looking for something a little bigger. I think it was as simple as seeing an advertisement for the army on TV. I think I saw it. I thought that sounds like a pretty good way to spend the first couple of years of my adult existence. So I literally transitioned into the military within just a few weeks and found myself as really a young kid in military training and completely out of my depth as a 17-year-old. So it happened very quickly. It certainly wasn't planned. I think if you ask my wife, she'd probably say it was the last time I made an unplanned decision in my life. So.
Sure. So you make the decision, and then what? You go home, tell your parents that this is what I'm doing, and it sounds like it happened quite quickly. So what was their reaction? And yeah,
it did. Yeah. And look, I think they were surprised, probably as surprised as I was having made the decision. But look, credit to my parents at the time. I think parenting in a different era, they didn't overanalyze it. They pretty much just backed me in and thought, well, if he's decided to do this, then we need to get behind him and support him. So they did. They were fantastic. I think if you ask them now, they probably would have told you that they had some reservations at the time as well. But really supportive, and off I went to recruit training in the military in Australia, which was a 12-week, certainly an adventure program that I wasn't ready for at the time.
Sure. So tell us about your career then in the military. What did it look like over the next few years, and I suppose the pathway that you could see for progression and development within the forces?
Yeah, sure. I think that one of the when I was reflecting on this before speaking to you, I thought a lot of my early career was completely unplanned. It was literally just on the fly, taking opportunities as they presented, as recommended by people that I trusted. So my first role out of the military was actually in warehousing. I was actually a storeman within the electrical mechanical engineer corps, which was largely a desk job within a warehouse. Certainly not where I'd sort of planned to spend my life. And I think after just 12 months, I realized that I probably wanted to do something else. So I think at about 18, I realized I needed to go back and get my education sorted out and get it completed. So that's what I ended up doing within the first 3 years is I went back with the support of the military and completed my Year 12 education, which then allowed me to go off and undertake officer commissioner training in Canberra in Duntrim. So that was my transition from being a soldier to an officer within sort of the first 3 to 5 years of my military career. And from there, I had another 19 years, I guess, of service within the military context.
So when you're going back and doing your Year 12, do you do that alongside other duties, or is that full time that you go back into education? How does that work?
Yeah, look, they were really privileged at the time. The Australian Army had this system where they took you out of all other duties, so you effectively became a full-time student on a military base, but evolved in a civilian curriculum. So you were doing a full Year 12 curriculum as if you were back being a Year 12 student. So, and look, the beauty of that time for me was that I was incredibly more focused. I had a purpose. I had a why. I wanted to complete my education because all of a sudden I realized I wanted to do other things that were going to set me up a little better. So I really knuckled down for that 12 months, along with the other sort of 20 other Army students who were there. And we generally did really well because we had a reason for being there as opposed to being sent to school. So yeah, it was a really formative and fun part of my first couple of years in the military.
I suppose purpose-driven leadership can be a bit of a buzzword in today's society, but it seems like from that decision that you made to move into the military, it became part of your journey from the beginning. When did you start to understand that passion or interest in protecting and caring for others?
Yeah, again, I mean, I'd like to say it was a planned decision. It was based on intense feelings that I had as a young man, but the truth is it wasn't. I just naturally gravitated towards roles that, even up till now, we in a role of protecting people or serving the community. And I think that was something that I probably didn't even reflect on until after 10 years in the military. When I look back, I thought, well, I seem to have this tendency to want to do or perform roles where I'm helping others or caring for other people in a way that allows you to have a fairly deep human connection. And it certainly wasn't planned. It was something that was fairly organic.
Sure. So I'm sure there was lots of different roles that you had in the Army and progressing through. But what were some of the pinnacle points of, I suppose, learning or development that you look back on now that still stand you in good stead to your transition and move into the corporate world?
Yeah, look, I think every young person that joins the military, certainly with the officer being officer in mind, is you generally aspire to want to lead people. You want to be someone who sets a direction and takes a team on a journey. And I was certainly drawn to roles that did that. The one thing the military is good at, I think, universally across the world, is really throwing people into the deep end before they're ready. So I had a number of very interesting complex roles in my early 20s and mid 20s where, quite frankly, the Army's got to put its scaffold around people. So they put senior people around you to make sure you don't go off the rails, but
Yeah.
they also give you roles where you can really step out and stretch and test your capability. And so for me, look, there were a few standout roles very early. I was a very junior platoon commander early in my career with the military policing platoon. I had a very senior, experienced warrant officer who supported my transition for a couple of years. That was a really formative role for me because I had to listen to people who'd been in the system for a lot longer than I had and who knew it a lot better than I did. So that was really formative. I think a couple of the overseas roles also, I was fortunate to get to serve in East Timor in 1999, 2000. Was a really a good exposure to humans at their best and their worst and what people can do when they're really challenged on a personal level. So that was helpful for me as a young officer to see that. I think I did a deployment to Iraq in 2004 as well, where I was actually embedded or deployed in with the United States military. And that was really interesting and informative because I had to work with sort of coalition forces from the UK, from the US, civilian organisations as well. At a time where, it was, to be really frank, it was a really difficult operating environment and we were challenged on a whole heap of levels. So some of those roles for me were really critical in sort of, I guess, helping me form my own leadership style. And probably more towards the end of my career, sort of back end of 2008, I was lucky to get to deploy with the United Nations again to an environment which was different, where it was an unarmed environment. It wasn't a conflict environment, but it was very much about peace building. So across, I guess, the course of the 20 years where I was performing these roles, that was some of the standout sort of highlights, I think.
For sure. And then, as you say, 2008 and then into 2009, as you begin to make this transition from the military, to what's next, what were some of the challenges that you faced there? And there are a number of people I talk to in the HSE world who are making that transition. What advice would you give to them, and how you overcame those challenges?
Yeah, there are definitely challenges. I think people are generally better at transitioning now, but I do see young guys and even older people struggling with the transition out of the military myself. I think the things I'd say to them, as I'd share from my own experience, is prepare as early as you can. Almost from the day you join the military, think about your exit, even if you don't know exactly when that's going to be. What that looked like for me was then going back and recycling through all my education. So I realized quickly that I had to get a broader suite of academic qualifications. So I did that over a period of about 10 years. So that early preparation, whilst at the time it wasn't obvious, it really set me up for my transition 20 years later. So I think preparing early is important. The old cliche about building a network is critical. Just because you're in the military doesn't mean you're in the military for your whole life, and you need to build your network from the time you get in outside the military. And I think things like LinkedIn have made that much easier than perhaps what it was when I was in the military. I have found that I haven't found anyone yet who doesn't want to help you when you ask. So ask for help, ask for people who've been through the experience that you're about to go through. I think it's really important. I think I'd also say to people, don't expect any preferential treatment because you've served in the military. People will thank you for your service, particularly here in the US. It's a really strong part of their culture, which is really lovely. But don't expect people to kick open doors for you just because you served there. And it's just something that some people do expect, and it's just not realistic, I'm afraid. The market's competitive.
For sure.
And I think for those who are a bit older, so I left the military in my sort of late 30s. I think I would say be really considered about when you do choose to exit. Because if you leave it too late, there really is, I think, a danger of people thinking you've been out in the system too long and you're too institutionalized and that you think a certain way. All of those things people like to say are not prevalent. The reality is they are. And I think for me, if I had my time again, I probably would have exited probably 5 years earlier. But it's probably just worth reflecting on that. Once you get into your 40s and your 50s, it becomes a much harder transition point. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I would echo that for sure. So you're coming out. How clear were you on what you wanted to do? What was next? What was the role in society you wanted to play, and how did that then play out?
Yeah, I think, to your earlier question about sort of purpose, I mean, I think I knew by this stage as a slightly older fellow that I knew I wanted to remain in roles that were going to have a protective element to them. I didn't really know what that meant and how it translated directly into the commercial world. But there were companies that presented pretty obviously as having quite a similar dynamic to what you see in the military in terms of crisis management, risk management, security, which are all natural gravitation points for people coming out of the military. So for me, it was about identifying which companies I may be able to go into as a transition point. And I got some really good advice from a friend who'd actually done it before I had it. He said to me, don't think your first job is going to last forever like it does in the military. You're not going to be there 20 years. You're going to transition quite quickly. And that was really good advice. And that's exactly what ended up happening to me. I rolled through a couple of jobs fairly quickly, mainly because I was just curious. And I think I wanted to keep exploring until I found a natural fit, which took a couple of years to find that natural fit.
Sure. And I think I saw that this was the first couple of roles were based were they based in Singapore rather than in Australia. What was the location that you were based in when you left, and how did they come about?
Yeah, so my last role in the military was actually in East Timor, and when I completed that role with the UN, United Nations, I went back to Australia, and then I stepped straight off into Singapore from there. Had a network connection who had a role in Singapore. I think for me it was attractive because the work was not dissimilar to what I'd been doing in the military. It was crisis and emergency management type work. But I was also really attracted to working in Asia, and even to this day, it's still one of my favourite places in the world. And for those who've been to Singapore and lived there, you'll know it's just such a fantastic place to live and work. So it was really a natural pull towards that region for me.
Sure. Yeah, I've not had the pleasure, but I've heard from lots that it is the place or a great place, one of the great places to be. But I'm sure with your global travels, you'll have some others that are also on that list that I should have. So risk and crisis management formed part of those first couple of roles, and then I think it was in the move to BHP where you transitioned perhaps into more of the HSE type role.
Correct.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so again, not a structured plan decision, and happened very organically. Again, I initially went in to perform, I guess, more security-based work, and that sort of transitioned into becoming more of a HSC type role. I think it became obvious to me around that time that if you tend to stay in security work or crisis management work, it is very siloed. It can be quite one-dimensional after a period of time. And because I've done it a lot in the military, when the opportunity came to move more into the safety field, I certainly grabbed it and saw it as being something that just opened up a different pathway for me.
Sure.
And to be honest, BHP is almost the perfect company. It was at the time to do that because it was a huge multinational company. The work we did was in exploration, so it was in places that were developing countries, and it really was right up my wheelhouse in terms of the work that they were offering.
Great. No, I think that I certainly see that in terms of the career path. As you say, risk and crisis can be silos, but also it's very much capped to a point of seniority within organisations. Whereas with HSE and other functions, you have more trajectory to grow and to develop and to go beyond. Was that part of the thought process?
Yeah, I think you've definitely got the ability to influence a wider part of the organisation as well in safety or OHS, HSC type roles. And you definitely have great access to the entirety of the organisation because everyone needs to be safe, or everyone needs to get home to their family and loved ones. So everyone's got a natural interest in it. When you tend to talk about crisis management or security, it can be quite defined in terms of the interest group that you're going to attract.
Yes.
So safety applies to everyone at home, at work. We all do it, whether we think about it or not. Every day we make decisions about being safe or not. So it didn't feel like a stretch at the time to move into this line of work, and it's certainly something that, looking back, I think I would say to any, especially a transitioning military person, don't be afraid to spread your wings a little and test yourself in somewhere that you may not be completely comfortable with initially, but you've actually got quite a suite of knowledge in your mind about it from your history.
Sure. Understood. And then came the move to Wood. So I think it was nearly 10 years that you spent at Wood. Firstly, what did that mean from a location perspective? Were you still in Singapore, or had you moved back to Melbourne at this point?
So no, it was a move back to Melbourne at this point. Wood was look, at the time, Wood was a company that had many companies operating independently under the Wood banner. And it's changed a lot since then. But at the time, the role was essentially a regional security role, so transitioning back to security, with a great focus on Papua New Guinea at that time, because that was an area that the company was looking at and interested to get involved in. So it was very much almost a greenfield opportunity for the business.
Sure. And then how did the role progress and develop?
Yeah, so the role sort of went from initially being singly focused on Papua New Guinea to being more Asia Pacific sort of focused. So we had a lot of other work in the region there. So there was the business had historically had security people in it. So it was largely building systems and processes and policy to support a business which was growing on the international stage at the time. And look, a really good environment, entrepreneurial mindset and spirit. For me, it's always about who you work with. I had some great people to work with at the time. The gentleman who was heading up the security function was a Brit, really progressive thinker, and a really good fella at helping people get absorbed into the business quickly in a really inclusive way. So, and look, you'll hear me talk about this all the time. I think for me, it's always about who's around you, who's your first touch points in the business. And for me, at that time, my first touch points were just outstanding people.
From my understanding at that point was, as you say, very entrepreneurial, going through some pretty big and significant growth. And I suppose that, the unstructure of growth and what that brings, and may have been in contrast to the days of the military where everything was structured. How did you find going into such an entrepreneurial environment and having to control and as you say, build those systems around something that was probably growing arms and legs in every direction under the sun?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always tricky to find that balance. And I think coming out of the military, we do tend to think in a very orderly, sort of neat, structured way. What I would say at the time is that Wood was really open to the idea of becoming more systemized and more procedural at a high level. So I was really pushing on an open door in that regard. And I didn't have a lot of pushback or challenge in terms of what I was trying to do. The business very much understood that if it was going to evolve and become the mature business that it wanted to be, that it needed to have the right level of systems and process in place. So look, I felt really fortunate at the time. I had a good leadership team around me, certainly supported peers and a boss at the time who was really, couldn't really have asked for more at the time, to be honest.
And then the move from the regional role through to the group head, which I think was the global position of security. How did you find that transition from moving to something that was, it was regional, so it's still big scale, but I suppose to something then that was, truly global and international? How did you find that step up?
Yeah, it was definitely a step up. I think it wasn't daunting in the sense that I didn't feel that I had the background for it. Certainly did, but it was a change of environment in terms of the stakeholders you're engaged with. So instead of just engaging with the local CEO and the regional teams, you're all of a sudden stepping up. You're engaging with a senior leadership team. You're engaging with a board, and you're engaging with a broader church of people in the business that you may not have that contact with. But look, I think the principles of how you have to work as a functional person didn't really change. You still have to get collegiate sort of alignment in terms of what you're trying to do, and talking about the why is always important. It's funny because I've just literally come off a call with my TKE team this morning talking about that Simon Sinek piece about purpose and why it's so critical. Instead of talking about programs and performance and metrics, it's just not something that people relate to very well. So if I go back to that time, I think we had a good group of people who were good at explaining the why, and that made it a lot easier for me to transition into a global role.
Sure. Okay. So then with the global nature, I think it was at that point you then decided to move to, was that when you transitioned to Houston after that role? And or how did
yeah,
that?
Yeah, absolutely.
what happened with from the family perspective, I suppose? How was that? How was that sold to them, and what was their input into that decision?
Yeah, in terms of how it happened, again, I'd really like to tell you, I don't have a structured story to tell you here, Josh. So it was another thing that happened literally in a moment. I was sitting in the coffee shop for our company in Aberdeen, and my boss at the time literally turned to me and said, how would you feel about going to Houston and heading up the safety program for the Americas business? And I remember laughing out loud at the time, and I thought that she was just literally having a joke. And it really didn't go very far beyond that conversation. We sort of moved on to other things. And then a week later, she called me and she said, so what do you think? And I hadn't even explored it with my wife at the time. Yeah. So look, it moved very in an unstructured way. My wife was supportive. She's Canadian anyway. So a move to the US was attractive to her from a family point of view. My wife's also been through, 17 moves when I was in the military. So moving for her again wasn't a big concern. But yeah, literally within, I think it was 3 months, we were on a plane, stuff packed up, landed in Houston, and sort of welcome to Texas. So it was a quick move, an unplanned move, and pretty reflective of how my career has gone for the last 10 years in terms of geographic moves.
Yeah. So the interesting point for me on this is what tips you have for people who have to relocate and for a new role, because I suppose you're facing two big challenges there. You've got the relocation for you and your family and settling into a local community there, but then you've also got a new role, new remit, and having to throw yourself into that. How do you balance that? Because that's something I've always found to be quite fascinating for people that do that. Is it seems like a lot to take on all at once.
It really is. And I can tell you, having done it so many times, that it's only probably now I fully appreciate the gravity of every decision that we made as a family to move. Because when you're in the military, it's very muscle memory. You just move because that's what you do and that's what's expected. But when you leave the military, it's not. So when an opportunity is presented, you've got two considerations. It's one, the family consideration, does it work? And two, does it geographically work for you from a professional point of view? I've been really fortunate. And I don't say that sort of flippantly. Like, my wife has been nothing but a warrior in terms of handling the geographic transitions. And if you don't have your family support, you can't do this. It's just not possible. I probably underestimated to a point the impact on my son, who's now 16. I'm lucky. I've got a very resilient kid. He bounces and moves quite easily, and he makes friends easily, and he's academically doing okay. But that may not be the same for everyone. So I'd say if you're thinking about doing something like this, you need to think through the longer term impacts, not just on your partner, but also on your kids. And every kid's different as well. Mm-hmm. What works for one kid doesn't work for another kid. So all of that for us was, again, we thought about it, we considered it, we moved fairly quickly because we had a history of moving. It didn't seem like a leap. Being here in Houston as an Aussie, as an expat, it's a fairly comfortable community. There's a big expat community. We tend to hang out with other expats. The locals here are lovely. They're welcoming. It's a great place to live from a family perspective, but very different from Australia. Very, very different. But I will say that we've enjoyed it. It's been, there's certainly no dull moments in Texas.
Yeah, I'm sure. So what at this time, so what's this? You've moved across 2017, 2018?
2018, yeah. So in 2018, we moved across. Pandemic hit, as you recall, in 2020. We moved back, ironically, to Australia for about a 14-month window during COVID, and then subsequently moved back 12 months ago back here to the US with Wood again to take up my role here in Houston. And it looked, simply put, that the role I was in globally at the time was far more easy to execute in the Northern Hemisphere than it was from the South. And, the challenges of time zones, I mean, you're well aware of them. You can do it for a while. I think you can perform a global role in Australia for a while, but eventually, regardless of what anyone tells you, it does catch up. And it'll either impact you in your work, it'll impact in your personal life through your sleep patterns or any number of other ways that it comes out. So that was the decision to move back to the Northern Hemisphere so that I could be a bit more efficient with what we were doing.
Understand. And I assume then from I suppose thinking about 2018 and I suppose the wider sentiment of the oil and gas industry, pressures from reducing carbon and the net zero movement had really started at that point. How did those pressures affect Wood? And as a leader within the organisation, how were you finding? What was the message from the business about how they were transitioning or what it looked like? Because I'm sure there was lots of conversation about that at that time of what the viable business is moving forward.
Yeah, I think like similar to every other company in the industry, whether you're a support company like we were, engineering company, or whether you're a major, I mean, the movement away or the desire to move away from hydrocarbons or fossil fuels it's everywhere. Like it's not just part of Wood, it's every conversation in every company around the world at the moment is how do we reduce our reliance on fossil fuels? And Wood was no different. I think Wood became acutely aware, and I want to say the time period was sort of 16, 17, that it needed to move with the rest of the world in the energy transition, and it made really quick steps and quick decisions to try and identify how it could be part of the solution. And I remember being at the time feeling grateful that the company was making really considered decisions, and still is to this day, in regards to what it's doing and putting its effort into optimizing renewable energy sources, which is what we all want to do and leave behind a better world for our kids. So I felt good about what Wood was doing at the time, and I felt good when I left that they were on the right trajectory in terms of supporting, I guess, the global initiatives around carbon reduction.
And how did those changes affect the operations of the business in the sense of what your engineers were doing and therefore the risk profile that they were facing, and how you would have to take that I suppose different risks into consideration from a safety perspective?
Yeah, look, I think generally speaking, I'd say the business is trying to move away from carbon intensity that oil and gas sort of provides, and they're certainly starting to provide more investment and more concentration into mitigating solutions like carbon capture and offset options and that sort of thing. And I think from a safety perspective, there wasn't a significant shift in terms of, I mean, obviously some of the oil and gas work that gets done is highly complex and quite risky, but I guess the work we were doing at the time, particularly here in America, is around solar work and renewables, was actually not difficult to support from a functional point of view, and in fact, in some ways, probably a little easier from a functional point of view.
Sure, understood. Okay, understood. So, moving to today then, and TK Elevator. So, tell us, because it's a fairly recent move. What was it that attracted you to the organisation, and tell us a bit about the organisation and I suppose the goals and objectives for what you've joined and the journey you're on.
Yeah, sure. So I think I've been with Wood, it was always just a tick under 10 years. So I was also sort of spent, I'm starting to get close to my mid-50s, right? So I'm certainly closer to the back end than the front end of my career. And I think after a block of 10 years, it just became time to try and explore something new. I knew that if I stayed, I was probably going to see through to the end of my career, and I felt like I had another journey in me. And when the TK opportunity presented, I think what attracted me was, first of all, it was a different industry, completely different, nothing to do with energy or, I guess, oil and gas. So that was attractive. It's something to go and learn something new for a start. It was an opportunity to go and meet some new people. The oil and gas industry does tend to be, you do tend to work through the same people traditionally. Even if you change companies, you'll have the same sort of network. So this was a new opportunity to broaden my network. And I think, as a parent stepping back from it, the opportunity was also a chance to look to move into an industry that was really doing some substantive things in the sustainability space. So I remember it was probably just 4 or 5 years ago, my son's saying to me in the kitchen one night, I was sitting here in Houston, and he said, why do you work in the industry you work in? When I was in oil and gas. And that was a really hold the mirror up moment for me about why I was working in that particular industry. And now if you ask me that question again, it's just a far easier question for me to answer about why I'm here. In terms of, this company is about keeping the world moving. It's about mobility. It's about putting in place things that simplify people's lives in a sustainable way. So it's just a much more rich conversation for me to have. So yeah, there are the few of the reasons that I moved. And I think, at the back end of my career, this is a chance to, as a global head, to really leave a legacy that I can finish my career and be proud of in, whether it's 3, 5, 10 years or however long that is.
Sure. And TK Elevator came from, for those listening that don't know, came from a carve out from the ThyssenKrupp business by 2 major private equity partners. Just remind me, is this the first time that you've worked in that environment, or at least so closely to private equity and kind of the investment world?
Yeah, it is. To be this close, it absolutely is the first time. So that's, that's been part of the learning journey for me, is working closely with our investment partners. And it's actually been one of the most enjoyable things I had to learn the last few months.
Sure. And what would you say have been some of the differences in working within a privately owned business to a listed business from a safety perspective?
Well, I think for a start, you've just got a different sort of group of stakeholders who've got interests and the need to have interaction with. So if you're working in a listed environment, that's not something you traditionally do day to day. Whereas in the environment I'm in now, I've got really good, I think, fairly deep relationships with the investors from both of the groups, and we talk frequently. And it's been really helpful for me to understand their perspective and what they want to see. And interestingly, they want to see exactly what we want to see, which is they want to see the business be successful commercially. They want us to do it safely, and they want us to do it in a very ethical way that we can all be proud of. So I think some things are very common, whether it's a listed environment or a private equity environment. Those 3 for me haven't changed.
Sure, understood. I suppose just sort of thinking about the industry and the position that you're in, there'll be lots of people listening who perhaps have aspirations to move from maybe a national to a regional, or even a regional to a global role. What would be some of the tips that you would give to leaders who are on that journey about how to, I suppose, embed safety or HSE or OHS culture when you move to a bigger remit and you can't be in the place all the time with all the people? What's your approach or advice on that regard?
First of all, it's not easy. It's tough. It's tough going, and it's certainly not for the faint-hearted. I think if you're in a multinational environment like we're in now, there's a few things that do make it a little easier. And the first one is, and might be a surprise to you or your listeners, is just get the right people around you. If you don't have that right group of people around you, have the same vision and the same view of what the future could look like, it is incredibly tough. I'm fortunate. We're building a great team at TKE where we've got people who they can see the finish line, and we're working out how to get there at the moment. But that's critical for me. And I think part of that is, and I thought about this yesterday before we spoke, but it's about ensuring that you hire. Not hiring in your own likeness is critical, because I've seen that happen time and time again, particularly in the security and crisis management area, where people just continue to hire people with the same background, the same experience. And we're deliberately not doing that at TKE. We are finding people that bring unique skills, unique gifts that we don't have. And for me, that's critical. If you want to change a culture, then you've got to reflect the countries that you work in, the cultures that exist in those countries. And for me, that comes back to who you hire and who you bring into your team.
And are you talking there about industry sector, or are you talking about behavioural style and approach, or both, or anything else? What to find that in a bit more detail?
Yeah, so I think it's both, Josh. I think first of all, you have to have industry experience within your team. So if you take the team I've got now, for example, we've got some really rich experience in the elevator and escalator industry. So people have been doing this since they were literally, 20 years old, and it's critical. You can't exist without that experience. What we're also doing is introducing non-industry people. So people who bring in experience from gas, construction, maybe chemicals, maybe people from even the media. That's important. But probably what trumps that for me is the behavioural piece. So trying to bring in people that will bring the sorts of behaviours, the values that are going to be critical to success. And that's the piece that is actually, I think, more important than where someone comes from.
Yeah.
So I'm a firm believer that you can train for skill as long as the behaviour base is solid. And I think that's what we're trying to do now. We're trying to make sure we've got a mix of experience, but we're also bringing people in who are going to be on the same journey path from a behavioural point of view.
Sure. And obviously across Wood and BHP, now TKE, these organizations are, large, complex, high risk types of environments. So the operational leaders that you partner with, have competing demands, competing pressures, lots of challenges. What's your team's approach, and how have you done this previously to actually support those people in what they do? Because I think one of the things that I see that some individuals in this space get wrong is perhaps not embedding themselves with those key leaders and building the relationships. And I'm just keen to understand, how do you do that to ensure that actually your team can be as impactful as possible?
Yeah, look, you're right. And it's probably a key tenet of whether you're successful or not is how well you partner up with, particularly in these businesses, how you partner with the operational leaders it's almost a key determinant of whether you're going to succeed or not. So for me, so what I've done as part of my initial journey in TKE is I've tried to get out and spend time with people and not like this, like not on a call, like not on a phone. It's getting on a plane and flying to where they live and flying to where they work. I've just done a month in Asia Pacific, as I said. So that was, it's funny because the site visits are great. You get a lot out of them, but you get a heck of a lot more out of the dinners, the breakfasts, the lunches, the time you hear about people's experiences, their families, and that was really helpful. And I think for me, I've tried to base my first 5 or 6 months at TKE on those really genuine interactions that you tend to have face to face. I've been fortunate. I've hit each of the regions so far, our major business units. So I've been through Europe. I've done a little bit in the US, a lot of time in Asia. And for me, that's probably the most critical element, is taking the time to get out and work with people in their home locations and not remotely.
Sure. Yeah. And I'm sure the people that you see on the ground doing the job, it must be a welcome surprise for a management board member to be there with them, finding out about what they do, taking keen interest, and just generally building culture comes from that type of activity, I suppose.
Yeah, look, I think people do appreciate you getting out and visiting, and as long as you, it's funny, I think as long as you approach these visits in the right way, if you go out there with a checklist in your hand, and it feels like you're there to check, you're there to audit, that's not welcome, to be candid with you. I mean, people don't appreciate that. But if you get out there and you have conversations about what they're doing, how they're doing it, what can we do to support you better? What are the things we're asking you to do right now that are quite frankly not helpful, and helping to declutter things from their life that make their work tougher, not easier. Those conversations are the ones that seem to produce the best results for me in the field.
Sure, understand. And from just a general industry perspective, what would you say are some of the key topics and areas that are on your and your team's agenda for improving safety performance in the coming years? Kind of trends or topics that are becoming rife now and that you're looking to solve the challenges for? Because I think there'll be, as I say, others that are listening in similar organisations who may have similarities, may have differences. So it'd be good to hear what are you and TKE focused on from an HSE and risk perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's not an easy one to answer. But what I'd say is we are very much trying to transition from something I just described, which is a compliance mindset where people feel that safety are out there to sort of police and to audit. We're trying to transition, and we will transition into an environment which is far more based on care and support and understanding, which sounds very warm and fuzzy, I appreciate. But what we know from the recent academic research is that when you spend time supporting people, acknowledging how tricky their day could be, you're going to get much better results in the long run. So we are focused very much at TKE right now on moving our focus from compliance, procedure, process type world through to an environment where we're just simply there to support, to listen, to help change, to declutter. And I think it'll bear out over time that that's going to be the right thing to do. We're also heavily focused on serious injury and fatality prevention. So we're focused on the things that present the greatest opportunity for our people to harm themselves. And we're focused on making sure that our control regime provides a safe piece of architecture for our technicians to work in. That's a key focus. The other thing that we're focused on right now, Josh, is a large part of our business involves use of subcontractors and making sure that the model that we have, our safety program at TKE, is reflected through our subcontractors all the way through to the field. So for us right now, it's very much about SIF prevention. It's very much about subcontractor support and governance at the moment.
Sure, understood. Well, thanks for explaining that, and I'm sure you'll get there, no doubt. So thinking about your career, and I suppose the title of the podcast, Better Than We Found It, is because when I set this up, I wanted to understand about people's ambition or motivation or desire to do something with purpose by the time they kind of sit back in their pipe and their slippers with their pipe going. So for you, by the end of your career, what would you like your legacy to be to show that you've left the world better than you found it?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And when I was thinking about it, it falls into two areas for me. One's personal and sort of one's professional. So on the personal side, I want my son to be proud of the career I've had. I want him to be proud of the work that I've done over the last sort of 10, 20, 30 years, whether that be my early military work or the work I'm doing in the latter stage of career. So I would hope that he would stand in front of his friends or at school and say, hey, my dad does this and it's a very cool piece of work and it's helping the world for these ways. I would like that to happen. That's aspirationally on a personal level. On a professional level, what could I see that looking like? I think it'd be great. I always get a lot of pride from seeing other people be successful. And there's been a few people over the last few years that I would like to think I've had a small degree of influence over them to help them grow their career. So for me, on a professional level, when I'm sitting back and I'm away from this, seeing those people sitting in positions like this one that'd be really satisfying, to be honest, to see people that have gone through and not had similar careers, but maybe had similar experiences to what I've had.
For sure. And I think, as you progress as a leader, your own leadership capabilities and responsibilities, of course, become more apparent. So I think both of those are very fine and noble wants for your career, and I'm sure you've already done a lot of that on that journey, but there's still this final role, hopefully, to conclude it all within for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, look, the position I find myself in at TKE right now is incredibly exciting. There's so much to do. We've got a great crew of people around us, and I'm just excited about what the next sort of 2 to 3 years is going to bring.
Great. So look, Darren, thank you so much for your time today. I know that we're approaching the end of our session. I just wanted to ask if there's people that have listened that are inspired by your story, interested in what TK are doing, would like to get some guidance or tips. Would you be comfortable with people reaching out to you for that? And if so, what would be the best method for them to do it?
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. Always happy to help people. So email or LinkedIn is probably the best two ways. So LinkedIn, easily searchable. And my email is just simply darren.anstee@tkelevator.com. And happy to have phone conversations with people as well, whether it's about TK specifically or whether it's about potential career moves and things like that. And we are advertising roles at the moment in the best OSH team in the world. So if people want to apply, I encourage them to do that.
Yeah, nice plug. Good. Excellent. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on today and to talk it all through. Thank you very much for your time. I'm sure you're going to achieve those goals and objectives that you set out to, and we be obviously making sure I stay in contact to understand more. So thank you again. It'll be great to hear how it all progresses and maybe have you back on in a year or two and see how you're progressing on that journey. So appreciate it, and hopefully we can catch up soon.
Yeah, thanks for your time, Josh, and I really appreciate the opportunity to chat. Have a good one.
Cheers, Darren.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Better Than We Found It. I hope you have found value from this to support your own purpose-led journey. This episode was brought to you by GS2 Partnership, my organisation focused on providing talent solutions for sustainably focused organisations. We are driven by our purpose of connecting the people who believe in leaving the world better than we found it. If you are looking for a partner to support you with your hiring plans, or you are looking for your own career next steps, please reach out to us or personally drop me a message on LinkedIn. It's great to hear from listeners to the podcast, and I'd welcome the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for our next episode.